Welcome, everyone, to Eating Disorders in Midlife. My name is Lydia Rhino, and I am the Program Director at the Eating Disorder Foundation, and I am delighted to welcome everyone here tonight. Today's workshop is brought to you in collaboration with the Eating Disorder Foundation and Within Health. I would like to take a moment to share a little about the Eating Disorder Foundation. We're a nonprofit that was founded in 2003 with a mission to be an effective resource in the prevention and elimination of eating disorders through free and accessible education, support, and advocacy. We are a Denver-based organization that is now serving individuals and families both nationally and internationally. I want to thank anyone who has made a donation upon registration. We're able to provide free services because of the generosity of our community. I'll add the donation link in the chat if you would wish to contribute. All right. If anyone has questions for our presenter, I invite you to use the chat feature to communicate with me directly throughout the workshop. The chat is kept confidential and will come to me directly. We will save time for the Q&A after the presentation, and I will deliver those questions to our presenter. We will not be sharing the PowerPoint specifically. However, we are recording tonight, and we will send the recording as soon as possible. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mandy to say a few words about Within Health and introduce our speaker.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to see you, and thank you for being here tonight. Dr. Wendy Oliver-Pyatt and I are very excited to have this presentation with you. So I'm Mandy Rector. I am one of the directors of business development for Within Health. I'm based here in Colorado and a huge fan of the Eating Disorder Foundation and of the work that we do at Within Health. So to tell you a little bit about our program, this is an amazing quote from Dr. Wendy Oliver-Pyatt, one of our co-founders. She says, "For some patients, being at home and being in treatment is powerful." And that goes to show that we are a 100% intentionally remote PHP-IOP program where we treat all clients ages 13 and up with primary eating disorder or disordered eating in the comfort of their home. We use clinical excellence, technology, and compassion to deliver effective treatment where life happens. Really working with all of our clients in their native environment using the unique Within Health tools that we've developed to support all of our clients nationwide. And then we have, so as you can see here, this is just a quick little snapshot of what I like to call the milieu is done within the Within Health app, where all of our clients can access where their groups are, what supports they need, if they need to have any source of community and connection, all happens right at their fingertips on their phone. All right. And I'll take a quick moment to introduce Dr. Wendy Oliver-Pyatt, co-founder and CEO and Chief Medical Officer of Within Health and Galen Hope. Dr. Wendy Oliver-Pyatt is a world-leading expert on treating eating disorders. With more than 25 years of clinical experience, she has developed 4 separate treatment programs, all grounded on a strong biopsychosocial foundation and incorporating intensive psychotherapy with behavioral foundations and high medical standards. Wendy has developed a unique treatment approach that delves into the underlying issues that place a person at risk for mental health conditions and eating disorders and leading to healing, health, and inner peace. So turning it over to Dr. Wendy Oliver-Pyatt.
Thank you guys so much. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just making sure. It's always interesting when you're giving a talk and you don't see any faces, you're just talking away and you see, your PowerPoint and that's kind of it. I have a couple of slides that were done when we did a presentation alongside Dr. Leslie Williams and Ibbets Newhall, who aren't with us tonight. And Rebecca Brumm, by the way, our Chief Clinical Officer, wasn't able to be with us this evening due to some family things going on, which I'm very glad she was able to do her family thing versus this, which is something I often advise folks that are younger than me in the field. But Leslie and Ibbets did this talk with me some time ago. So I just wanted to share a couple of Leslie's slides that I think really get right down to the point. We don't normalize the physiological changes associated with aging. Instead, we our society has this obsession with maintaining youth, as I'm sure we all are quite aware of this. So there's a lot of the biology of aging. We'll talk a little bit more about this. This is some of the things that Dr. Leslie Williams is speaking about, and I want to really go quickly through this part because I want to be able to move to the part of the talk where we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the psychodynamics, but I'll put these through, and if anybody wants more information on it, even though we don't usually hand out the slides, I'm happy to send summaries of the presentation. So what we really want to kind of focus on is that disordered eating and a fear of aging oftentimes really do go hand in hand for many folks. And the data kind of points to that. Reporting weight and shape affects their self-image, 79%. And then obviously as we age, there's natural, changes associated with aging, and all of these issues become even more prevalent as we know. There was an interesting article I recently stumbled across. It was actually published in 2013 in the International Journal of Eating Disorders, comparing premenopausal, perimenopausal, and postmenopausal eating disorder symptomatology. And what I found very interesting about it is that the perimenopausal folks did have more eating disorder symptomatology, but it actually wasn't related to weight. It wasn't related to increased BMI. And even as you factored out age, that there was just something about being perimenopausal in and of itself that was picking up more eating disorder symptomatology. Again, so this more thinks it sort of leads us more to thinking about the psychology of what's going on. It's not actually related to the weight itself. This is a slide that Ibbotts likes to talk about, is that perfect storm, and she likes to talk about the feeling of redundancy. And this is something that's very different than in other cultures, or many other cultures, where aging is really seen as something that you respect and you honor, and versus our society, it's more of the idea that you're replaceable and you're redundant. And of course, the empty nest feeling. We have very nuclear families, we are acculturated around very nuclear families. So, when our kids leave, there's just not really necessarily, I'm speaking in general terms here, but there's not really necessarily that the support around us. I'm going through that myself at this time. And so some of you who know me well, we were just joking about it. For every room that is empty in my house, I have foster cats. So I'm in a room right now with a family of 6. So, I had the empty nest syndrome. So we all have to find our ways to adapting to that. And that's one of the things that I've dealt with, is that empty nest feeling. And so that's one of my compensations for that. But it is a big loss for us. And many are also going through divorce and sandwich in between kids in their 20s with stressors they have, and then elderly parents. Definitely work environments with feeling competing for younger workers, retirement stressors, health issues. And it's a lot that's really happening, all at once. So just important that we're mindful of all that. And I really honor all the folks that are on here today that have struggled or are struggling with eating disorders. As a more mature woman, it takes, it's an extra burden also, in that our society still does tend to have a view of eating disorder as in certain populations, young females, and it's just not the case. And so more mature women face added stigma around coming forward with their eating disorder symptoms. And there's many reasons why people in their midlife and going beyond, outside of hormonal changes and other losses, contributes to eating disorders. Is some of the people that we work with have had treatment trauma in the past, or different things that make it even harder to go to treatment. Obviously, there's other variables with responsibilities, but I've seen a lot of hesitation or resistance to going to treatment because of very bad experiences in their earlier life. That's one of the things that I do love about Within, is that we do have a mature adult milieu, many of those folks in that mature adult milieu have had very bad experiences and just are not willing to take the risk of re-traumatizing themselves. So I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but we can talk about that. So we're supposed to just keep working harder, keep up the good work. Weight loss is complemented, looking younger is, part of the natural course of conversation. And so that's something, just a reality that we all face. So I came up with a term that I called successful. So the idea that you're going to the gym and you're losing weight and you're, eating healthy, and all of this is like what we're calling success in the outward world, when it's really about a person getting sicker and sicker. And that's one of the things that really gets in the way that's socially reinforced. Shame gets in the way of getting treatment. I'm too old to have an eating disorder. Feeling like an outsider in treatment. The eating disorder had been really woven into the person's identity for many years. So fears of leaving the eating disorder, and then obviously financial concerns and responsibilities at home. But many of these are issues that get in the way of getting treatment. So some of the things that we want to figure out how to do is help people move away from being the caregiver role and allow themselves to become somebody that receives care, right? That's a big thing for some of us. Some of us mature women, we've been caretakers our whole life. And if we're struggling with an eating disorder or any really illness per se, medical or psychological struggle, where it's hard for us to be in that receiver role. And then also honoring the life experiences and the competencies. And that's something that can be really difficult in treatment when the milieu doesn't have that cohort of mature folks in it, just really feeling a little bit like, the significance of life experiences doesn't really get honored in the way it might need to. So having shared experiences in treatment is very, very important. Managing grief and regret. And really, one of the things that I've been very interested in recently is some of the research that has come about for something that's called DUI, which stands for duration of untreated illness. And the things that really affect that are, having had those early, really poor experiences of treatment. And then also some of the variables that can really help with that is actually having shared experience with mature women. And interestingly enough, and very specifically, two other factors that can help are actually stories of recovery. I noticed that Betsy is in our audience today. I noticed that, and she's a wonderful author that has shared her story of recovery. Hi, Betsy. And the importance of sharing stories cannot be understated. I actually have started to think it's a very specific intervention that actually should be standard in treatment. And I don't really give a crap if it's not double-blind, placebo-controlled study. It's clinical wisdom and clinical experience that tells me that. And, maybe when we're talking, Betsy, perhaps you can share a little bit about those experiences of sharing your stories and the profound impact that those shared experiences bring about. Because I think for mature women, they're like, you hear the recovery story from like the 22-year-old, but where's the recovery story of the mature woman? The interesting thing about that particular study that I was blown away by, that I think is underutilized, is the importance of a primary care provider who takes the eating disorder seriously. Those are two things out there that need to be happening in treatment that can change the course of treatment. Unfortunately, we all know how often the primary care providers don't take it seriously. But having a primary care provider be able to take it seriously and do that psychoeducation is huge. And then the importance of recovery stories is powerful. In fact, I am on a mission now. I just was, talking with, we actually just came across, I just got this idea like earlier this week, that, for the folks that have that, I'll call it the eating disorders really woven into their identity. I sort of think of sometimes of these buckets of resistance, and that bucket where the eating disorder gets really, really woven into the identity. That's like also when you take that in combination with like a mature woman with an eating disorder, it's like a really kind of powerful thing to have to face, right? When the person's identity is there, and then which we all have seen that, and then just the feeling of like, oh, I'm too old to recover, I think that's where recovery stories really come in to help people see that it's possible and help people navigate out, to this new identity that has to kind of get built. So a lot could be said about that, but I'll just keep going. So I think that just so much about who we are as women as we age is pathologized, and fat, as we know, of course we know, is pathologized. And my dad is 96 years old. God bless his wife. She's 90 years old. She to this day makes comments about eating, comments about her body, and doesn't see the value of the fat on her body. But I will tell you one thing, when she fell really hard and didn't break any bones about 6 months ago, I didn't want to rub it in her face, but there's so much point to having fat on our body. And as we age, we really need that fat for a lot of different physiological functionings. And I think, we're built to survive. And so as we age and we're more frail, the body wants to hang on to some energy sources, which makes a lot of sense in the event that we're sick or ailing or lack of food availability. This is all a part of just the natural process of life, but it's pathologized. And that's a real mind fuck for somebody who's got an eating disorder, and society is reinforcing this idea. It's such a vulnerable time. Midlife is such a vulnerable time, similar to puberty. And the social reinforcement of quote getting healthy is so very important. A Pew study from just this year looked at 4,573 adults and asked, what does society value, among the genders? And so with men, it was honesty for men, morality, professional success, ambition, strength, and hard work. And physical attractiveness was just mentioned by 11% of respondents. For women, it's right to the physical attractiveness by 35% of the respondents. Then empathy, nurturing, and kindness, of course, we have to give to others. And then intelligence, maybe that's okay too. But such a big difference about what our society values in the genders, right? I mean, we could talk about that for a long time. We kind of have to fight this together too, people. Like, this is so pervasive and so deadly and so joy zapping, these values that we're swimming around in. So we kind of do have to band together and be together. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful that we have, I don't want to sound like a within, infomercial, but I'm really grateful for the mature women milieu, because they really get into supporting each other. And I really believe that there's a true power in groups when you're talking about societal factors that are so likely to do these, like, cause these, mind fuck, excuse my language. But so menopause, I want to make sure we get a little bit, talking about what the stages of menopause are. So perimenopause can begin as early as the 30s or the 40s, and it's just where the hormones are starting to decline. Menopause is just defined as no menses for a full year. The ovaries are no longer releasing eggs. And then post is everything after, which means it's the rest of your life. It's the rest of your life. It is something that we sort of, I think societally think it's just like I'd like for people to take a moment maybe, and we can talk about it. When you hear the word postmenopause, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word postmenopause? Just write down the first 3 words if you can, and maybe we'll see let's try to be honest with ourselves. What are the first 3 things you think of when you think of postmenopause? I'm writing, and I'm not proud to say what mine were, by the way. I'll share that later, but I don't like what just came to my head. But I'm going to forgive myself. I'm a product of our society. So if you guys don't mind writing down the first 3 things that comes to your mind, but really what's interesting, it's the rest of your life. So the body, the average age of onset of menopause, which is no menses for a year, is 51. But the body's changing before that. The estrogen and progesterone levels are diminishing. There are health risks associated with postmenopause that are addressable. And there's some conditions that can also be confused with menopause. And one of the points that I want to make today is that in talking about some of the health factors that are associated with postmenopause and how we can help each other with that, that is not meant to imply that we're trying to get rid of aging. These are more just physiological. We live a long time, many years past menopause in our society now. So there are health risks associated with all these changing hormones that we can treat, which does not mean that we're trying to do, anti-aging medicine does some of those interventions, but I'm not into this idea of like anti-aging. I mean, isn't that kind of crazy? Anti-aging, isn't that crazy? We actually have anti-aging medicine. Anti-aging, wow. Okay, good luck with that. So manifestations of the hormone changes, I think most of us know this, but certainly the cognitive issues can be really, really interesting. When I went through my perimenopausal stage before I was taking any bioidentical hormones, I kind of felt like I was having these cognitive issues, but I didn't realize it at the time. And I just think I wasn't like thinking as crisply. I think particular when I was in conflict at different times with different things going on, which is normal part of life. I think I was like less able to wrap my head around like what I needed for myself in different situations, because it was a little bit more like, I don't know, just a little bit more gray how I felt, what I needed. And I feel like after going on bioidentical hormones, I felt like I was more like clear about, hey, this was reasonable for me, or this is what I need. And so that was just one way that I don't think it was just in my head, but I feel like that was something that came up for me. I went through a divorce at that time, around that time, and I do have a good relationship with my ex-husband, but at the time I had to make a lot of decisions that I just felt like my brain was a little mushy, like couldn't really figure it out. And I think when it comes into eating disorders, like recovery is a lot of mental work too. You have to be like thinking about, I'm having the thought that, and I'm sharing that thought, and I'm analyzing that thought, or I'm learning DBT skills, or I'm, doing interpersonal work. I'm having to step outside of my comfort zone. So there's a lot of cognitive demand on recovery, I think. So these are just some anecdotal things I'm mentioning here as we look through the manifestation of the hormone changes. And so I love to break down any kind of condition, whether it's an eating disorder or any other condition. I like to break it down into what is a biopsychosocial foundation. So why is that? Well, biopsychosocial is a way of viewing any kind of condition that we face that's really sure to incorporate as many aspects of care and treatment as possible. Biopsychosocial, by the way, was not started, it wasn't developed by Hilda Brooke, but Hilda Brooke, in treating anorexia nervosa, was the one that revived this model, because when she was looking at eating disorders, she really recognized, holy cow, this really is, eating disorders are any conditions, like, wow, biopsychosocial conditions. I mean, you have every condition, smoking, diabetes, there's of course biopsychosocial variables and all of those, but eating disorders for sure. So as you think about it in mature women, you've got the biological conditions with the hormonal changes, sometimes exacerbation of pre-existing conditions, then the psychological, where we're trying to master, gaining mastery of our body in faces of change outside of our control, that defiance of mortality, anti-aging, the striving to stay relevant as a social issue, coping with loss, and then replacing an external target. I think that's really, really important too, where, I'm not working, I'm not taking care of my kids, but gosh darn it, I can go to the gym and I can exercise. And by the way, exercise in mature women, that's a big one where the eating disorder gets really woven into that too, which is a particular manifestation of the eating disorder. That's particularly pernicious, I think, in mature folks, men and women. So women are actually 2 to 4 times more likely to experience major depressive episode during menopause than any time in their life, which is huge. And of course, when you take a person that maybe has a pre-existing disordered eating or past history of an eating disorder or a lot of other things going on in their life that's pressuring them to potentially change their body, and you throw in a mood disorder, right? So a mood disorder, any kind of psychiatric condition, depression, trauma, and you mix it up with the eating disorder symptoms, right? It can get really, it's not like 1 + 1 = 2, because a disordered thought or body image disturbance can get magnified even further by a depressed mood state or negative cognitions. Or really, depression is really, in many ways, it's about a loss of perspective. And certainly an eating disorder is where a big aspect of eating disorders is having lost perspective. So you add these two things together and you can see why it is not uncommon for folks in menopause to be more at risk for the development of eating disorders. And then just think of all the life changes we've been talking about. You keep hearing me talk about that feeling of being less relevant, and just the way people are complimented for looking younger. And then, some of us age in different ways than others, so that's just a thing that can also trigger it off. If maybe your skin isn't aging well, or your hair is getting thinner or whatever, then it's like, well, gosh darn it, I can be the thinnest one on the elevator. And this is socially reinforced. So menopause can precipitate psychiatric disorders in women who are predisposed. I think this is a great quote, H. Schoenfeld: accumulated personal myths and expectations related to menopause are likely to affect the way in which a woman copes with it. So these expectations affect the way we cope with it. Obviously, education, culture, and life events weigh heavily. Good treatment involves this whole comprehensive care with psychiatric management and, I say, gynecological support, bioidentical hormones. You'll hear me talk about. These are my views, by the way. Not everybody agrees, but these are my views. And then I think also trauma and CPTSD can get mixed together with an eating disorder when there's these incredible losses that can happen. So what I'm happy about is that now we understand not just PTSD, but CPTSD, which is now in the ICD-9. And I think for mature women, this is especially, a time of vulnerability, loss, and even traumatic loss, as well as, more the buildup of life events over time. It could be loss of family members, aging parents, and just also the chronically, if you think about a chronically invalidating environment as a risk factor for CPTSD, our society is a chronically invalidating environment for, mature women. Mature people in general, but women face a little bit more as it relates to body image and beauty, of course. So we live in a chronically invalidating environment as it just relates to aging. So I think that we see some version of PTSD that gets woven into the eating disorder as well. This slide really just kind of talks a little bit. I put this together to talk about how the eating disorder manifestations of depression can happen in midlife. So there's the depression underneath, and then the way it can manifest in an eating disorder. So like the symptom of a loss of interest in pleasure and activities as a depression symptom can just become, food eating or not eating, or movement becomes the, the interest as opposed to other things. And then changes in appetite as a manifestation of depression certainly can be set off. The eating disorder restriction, which for some people, once they start restriction, they're either going to go into an anorexic kind of presentation or atypical anorexia presentation, or potentially a bulimia or a binge eating presentation. Of course, bulimia and binge eating disorder do start also with restriction. All of these eating disorders kind of have a root of weight stigma and restriction, but the weight loss associated with depression, I've seen it. I've seen folks get depressed and start to lose weight. Then they get rah, you've lost weight. And then the eating disorder sort of picks up. The sleep disturbance can be antecedent to problems with binge eating and different struggles with coping with insomnia. Agitation can manifest as overexercise. That sense of worthlessness can get twisted into a hyper focus on appearance, weight, shape, but as we've talked about. Concentration impairments can get put into hyper focus on eating disorder behavior. The folks with that even get into the recurrent thoughts of death and the suicidality. It sort of can just that high risk behavior, getting sicker and sicker, or the eating disorder sort of, I guess you could say, might mean less and less to the person. I wanted to spend a little time today because this is something we talked about this earlier this year with the Eating Disorder Foundation. By the way, thank you guys for having me back. And I think it got really interesting when we started talking about eating disorders in midlife as a defense. So I thought this could be interesting to kind of talk about, because we all have obviously defense mechanisms, understandably so. And things going on in midlife, obviously we are defending, we're trying to protect ourselves. So really what is a defense is that, what feels like the present to us is primarily the brain's prediction of what might happen a few minutes in the future, right? So we start off with where we are now. We're thinking about what's about to happen. Our brain's always preparing for what's next. In a sense. And then our minds are controlled by retained information from the past, or things that were happening around us that we have little control, or this is just there. So our society and what we're inundated with is there. And the brain wants to avoid danger, right? So these are all the things that set people up in general for defenses, but we're trying to think of it now, eating disorders in midlife, as a defense. So these are the things that are kind of foundational to like understanding like when we think about defenses, this is what kind of is at the core. I think one of the important things is that we're always wanting to avoid danger, right? And so one of the things to think about eating disorders midlife is like, we don't want to be, what is the danger? What are we afraid of as we age? I mean, heard me talk about relevance, but I want to go a little further. I have some ideas about that, but what are we afraid of as we age? Let's talk about that when we get into the next part of, when we do the little Q&A type of thing at the end. So the defense mechanisms, as we all know, they're unconscious strategies that we're trying to protect ourselves from the dangers that are out there. They're not inherently bad. We're just trying to navigate, painful experiences. So this is like what we're all doing. We're all doing this all the time, but in midlife, there's particular things that we're up against that our defense mechanisms are getting, triggered. So Again, this is just a wonderful quote, I think, is the brain is operating from memories and wants to avoid danger. We may occasionally respond quickly, defensively, and even thoughtlessly. So we, as we're aging, we're facing, I think, some danger of aloneness, I think, of our mortality, of social alienation, of being redundant, replaceable. So it's that danger of isolation that's so painful and so primitive inside of us that we're protecting, against. So I just kind of wanted, so if you're doing therapy with a person who's, in midlife, postmenopausal, dealing with an eating disorder, I just want to invite, or if you're a person coping with an eating disorder in midlife, I wanted to invite, it's easy in therapy to just kind of, as a therapist, I'll just say it's easy in therapy to just kind of do therapy and be talking and you're addressing things that's going on. But I always like to try to remind myself to really look at what's the underlying dynamics that's going on and what is the function of the eating disorder, what are the defenses at play. And I think it's useful to think about this in helping somebody go through an eating disorder in midlife. So denial is actually just refusing to recognize or acknowledge real facts or experiences that would lead to anxiety. So, I mean, come on. I mean, as we age, it's like, I'm, the fear is like, I'm aging, I'm mortal. So of course that makes sense for us to sort of fight back against that. So, repression, blocking out difficult thoughts from entering into consciousness. I'm divorced, I'm alone. I've been hurt, I've experienced infidelity, all of these things. My kids are gone, my kids are having problems. My parent died, my friend died, my friend has cancer, I have cancer, all these different things that start to happen more as time goes by. The longer you live, the more shit happens, right? It's like you've accumulated more beauty sometimes and more pain. So this activity of the eating disorder and getting up and going to the gym, it just takes over, and it's really effective. I think it's really effective for these kind of losses. Regression, right? It's just slipping back into the eating disorder for some people who've had eating disorders at an earlier developmental stage. And then displacement is really taking something out on something else. So in this case, it might be that we're taking things out on our body. I always talk about the body, unfortunately, sometimes becomes the playing field for these painful emotions. So these are just as you're, thinking about your work or yourself, what comes up for you or what comes up for your patients, and how might the eating disorder be a manifestation of some of the defenses that are likely to come up. Continuing on is reaction formation, right? It's being, kind of behaving in a particularly opposite way of what's underneath. So as we feel weaker, I think this is a big one in eating disorders. As we're feeling weaker and more vulnerable, we're getting really focused on fitness and health and strength and how fast are we running the half marathon and that sort of thing. So sublimation is usually thought of one of the more healthy defense mechanisms. So it's sort of taking things out in a positive light. I have my empty nest syndrome kind of thing going on, and I have my 6 cats in here. So I think it's a pretty adaptive way of dealing with it. And I enjoy my cat rooms. So sublimation can be a positive. Intellectualization is we're just getting really into the details. This is a kind of thing that you see live with orthorexia. It's just sort of taking over your brain, and it really can mask sadness and loss. Compartmentalization, leave your worries behind and go lose weight and be, get applauded by, everybody in your environment, from your family to your doctor to, pretty much wherever you go also. The other thing that I like to share and discuss as we think about any kind of human suffering healing is that, you know, we're all really just trying to get our needs met, right? We all have basic human needs, and we're trying to get our needs met. I love the work of Kaufman, who talks about interpersonal needs, the 6 basic interpersonal needs. And so when you kind of roll around and thinking about these needs, and then thinking about, you know, going through midlife, what is it that people are up against, and what is it they need? So people need to feel loved and wanted. In midlife, you can feel replaced and left. So the need to feel loved and wanted, you can feel replaced and left. We need to have touching and holding to feel safe and comfortable. Sometimes when you're divorced or kids are gone, there's really no more holding. There's less physical contact around us. So identification and personal culture we need for that. Oftentimes that culture just gets kind of the culture of what we've had around us, taking kids to school or going to, you know, sporting events. That culture just kind of dissipates. It's just not there anymore for us. Differentiation is important, just being, you know, having an identity that's separate from other creatures. That sort of happens in adolescence, but then that identity that we're building up sort of gets kind of shattered when all the things around us are changing. And again, I think we underestimate and we gloss over, and I've even done it myself, talking about empty nest syndrome. Like, it's a big deal. You go from a house or an apartment or whatever that's had busy activity, and then you're alone. That can be really, really difficult. Like for me, it's been kind of an interesting thing, because my life, sort of my external world, like, is so active, and there's so many people in my life, and I'm traveling and doing really wonderful things with my life. But at the end of the day, I'm going to bed alone in my bedroom. Like, there's nobody there, you know, I'm by myself. And that is a tough one. That is a real tough one. So I can certainly see the need to repress that, or to avoid that. We need to be nurtured, and we need to give nurturance. Again, people, you know, lose this. And then affirmation and the need to feel valued. These are all the needs that Kaufman talks about. And you can certainly see how in our Western culture, older women have definitely a tendency to be devalued. That term old maid comes to mind. And that's a concept that still even exists to this day. I'm checking on our time. I want to make sure we have time for some Q&A. So it's interesting when I was exploring some of the different cultures, I think that one of the ones that really caught me off guard was looking at the Iranian culture. Was that in Iranian culture, menopause is really, you know, looked up upon in a high way, and it's an enhanced opportunity to have more free sexual relationships, more freedom, because there's no risk of fertility. So it's really thought of as a freeing time, you know. And in the Chinese culture, it's sort of seen as a rebirth, because the younger women are the ones doing the childcare. So in Chinese culture, the mature women are sort of held in high esteem. In the Mayan culture, women are respected as elderly, and the status actually raises with age. And menopause is a sign of experience. Isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? That's what it should be like, I think. The last few slides I just want to talk about real quickly have to do with some medical things that I want to share. Osteoporosis is a really big deal as we age, and if we've had eating disorders in earlier life, it's an even bigger deal. So bone fracture is a big deal. 1 in 2 women, when over 50, 1 in 2 women experience a bone fracture related to osteoporosis, and women can lose 20% of bone density during the first 5 to 7 years following menopause. The quicker the bone loss is associated with greater risk of osteoporosis. And so, you know, the triple jeopardy, I call it, is the history of the eating disorder in youth, which might have also led to osteopenia, and then menopause, which also causes changes in hormones that exacerbate bone loss, and then a current eating disorder. That is a big, big problem, that triple jeopardy. And so there's a lot of hype and fear about the women's health initiative, and a lot of fear about hormones, and understandably so, and we should be really, really careful. But it is important to know that the Women's Health Initiative was looking at not bioidentical hormones. They were looking at the effect of estrogen and progesterone in the form of Prempro and Premarin, which is estrogen alone. And so because of the Women's Health Initiative, there has been a lot of fear about using hormone replacement. So the study itself came out, and when it was looked at further, there was really no risk of greater cardiovascular disease, invasive breast cancer, stroke, venous thromboembolism. In fact, instead, the authors concluded that the postmenopausal treatment increased the risks for all of this, but it actually just was not the case. And the final consequence of this is that, and I was one of those people, that people do not get hormonal treatment that can be so helpful. And so bioidentical hormones can be something that can be thought of, that I like to encourage people to explore. So bioidentical progesterone does not have a negative effect on blood lipids or vasculature as many of the synthetic progesterones. Bioidenticals actually show a reduced risk of blood clots compared to non-bioidentical, and then they can be very effective in addressing postmenopausal symptoms. So some of the things that really have made a difference for some of my patients are listed here. I want to mention one that doesn't get a lot of discussion, but I learned about it about 10 years ago, and it's called pregnenolone, and it affects brain function, supports neuropsychiatric health, pain modulation. It's an anti-inflammatory. It also helps a tremendous amount with sleep, as does progesterone, by the way. Progesterone, you have a lot of patients with that treatment refractory insomnia, and the progesterone can be really, really helpful. Testosterone as well, low libido, depressed mood, vaginal dryness, changes in cognition and muscle mass. So all of this is all available through bioidentical. And again, this is not about anti-aging, just it's about addressing the fact that we live longer, and it's ways to adapt better to that longer life. And then some added steps that I just wanted to put in together is, but for people who are struggling and need help, is find a program that meets the needs of mature women. Be aware of the baggage from prior treatment that might set you up to be, prepared for a negative experience. And true treatment trauma could really be a hindrance to re-engaging. Declaring a war on diet culture, declaring a commitment to gentle self-care. I remember that you're a role model for future generations, radical acceptance of the circle of life, finding meaning in aging. As you hear about my cats, that's my big thing. Becoming an activist. Take a big dream. Do the dog, the trip, the garden. I'm taking a trip with my daughter later in December, going to a spa together. Like, just go for it, go for those things that you've been thinking about doing, and just build that perspective and embrace what you can. Grieve if you need to. Reconnect with spirituality and engage in music, dance, art. I'm so happy. My girls tell me when they go out dancing, they dance harder than anybody. And I said, I must have taught them something right then. That makes me happy to know that. So anti-aging medicine, menopause, and health. This is a quote that I just came out of my mouth in preparing the talk. The key to navigation of menopause, in my view, is to strike the balance of remediation of symptoms caused by menopause that can cause a true biopsychosocial impairment, with acceptance of aging and aging with grace. And then, of course, I love Eric Fromm, so I'll share one of his quotes that I thought made sense to me, is the task we must set for ourselves is not to feel secure. We may not feel secure as we age. We may feel shaky, but to be able to tolerate that insecurity, to tolerate that and find ways to manage with that. With that said, I think I was able to stop with a few minutes left to talk.
Beautiful, Wendy. There were so many things on that last slide of just saying like the different things that you can engage with.
Mm.
And it's so helpful to remember that there is freedom outside of the eating disorder, and
Freedom.
there's time and there's ways that we can engage and reconnect.
And we need each other. We need each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I had one question come in, and I know there was a topic that you wanted to open up to see if
Yes.
anyone was interested in.
Yes. Mhm.
I'll read the first question and then we can dive into that other
Okay.
area of discussion. So the question that I got was discussing the perimenopausal effects on neurodivergent folks.
Oh, yeah.
Has there been any research or anything on the effects with autism and ADHD in particular?
Really interesting question. What I'm going to comment on specifically is ADHD to start, but I think it has overlay with autism. With ADHD, I think there's a lot of times when I've encountered people who had delayed diagnosis of ADHD, and they're like, and they finally get the diagnosis and they're like 48, and they're like, holy shit, look at all the time that I lost suffering. And then there's that secondary sense of not just only grief, but that over those years, all the buildup of like, I'm not the same as others, or I'm lazy, or I that learned helplessness, or that being misunderstood, where people think, as the book goes, lazy, dumb, or stupid. And the inherent like kind of shame that gets embedded in there certainly is something I've seen with folks as they've gone through menopause and dealt with ADHD. In particular, I've seen a lot of this kind of holy shit type of thing. With autism, I think that's a really, really interesting point, because over time too, the autism can actually evolve. I actually have a brother who has autism, and I've noticed as he's gotten older, he's 6 years older than me, I've noticed that it's actually gotten a little worse. So I have to really make sure I'm always thinking about what helps him is being around people. So it's something that I take a lot of thought. I put a lot of thought into, and I am really happy to say that in both Galen Hope and at Within Health, we really think a lot about ADHD and autism, and we have some really interesting protocols for dealing with folks like with ARFID and autism. And I take a lot. It means a lot to me to work with folks with autism, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and fear around working with autism. And there's like, oh, you have to be ABA trained to work with autism. It's like, no, you don't. Fine if you are, but people with autism need what we all need. People with autism still need connection. People with autism still need acceptance. It's not, in that sense, it's not rocket science, right? So
Very well said. And I think I'm really glad to hear that Within and Galen Hope both have protocols for working with folks with neurodivergence, because I think we've seen a lot more research come out that shows the overlap with eating disorders and neurodivergence. So,
oh my God,
very grateful to hear.
Yes.
Awesome.
I absolutely love working with folks with autism, by the way, because I just feel very protective.
For sure.
And I love neurodivergence. I love somebody having a different way of looking at the world. I'm like, that is so great.
We need it. It's normal, right? It's like the most like expected thing that we're all going to have a different perspective, and it's just extra different perspectives.
Exactly.
the other area of conversation that you wanted to bring up? I wanted to leave space for that too, to see if folks had anything
Yeah,
they
there
wanted
was
to bring
two
in.
things. I was going to invite Betsy to share, I know we only have just 5 minutes, but there's one more subject. So if you could just like in a 1 or 2 minute, just share a little bit about, your journey, sharing your story, and what, the impact that you've had has to have been amazing. I mean, I just tell us about it.
Well, thank you.
don't
I'm
mind.
I'm really honored to be asked to share on your workshop. But anyway, you said that word freedom, and that generated this sense of excitement. When
Mhm.
I think of one word that describes my recovery, it's freedom. I'm
Mm.
free to be me, free to use my voice, free
Mhm.
to connect with others, but most importantly, free to be my authentic self. I was diagnosed in my 40s, recovered in my 50s, was always a private person. If you had told me several years ago that I would be sharing my story at conferences and treatment centers around the country, I never would have believed
You would
it.
have been like, hell no. And here you
No,
are.
so I even spoke at Galen Hope last winter. But anyway, in all seriousness, if I can give anyone in midlife, especially who is struggling, even an ounce of hope or inspiration, that has literally become my passion, my purpose, and my life story is literally in my book, The Longest Match. I'm an open book and just want to help people believe that, and this is my message. If you remember one thing, I'll finish with this: it's never too late to be a work in
That
progress.
is right. And actually, I forgot, Rebecca had shared, didn't have time, a case study of one of our patients, a 70-year-old woman that came through within health. And it is not too late to recover. Absolutely not. And I do think having a cohort is a really beautiful thing, that I love that we have that mature adults. I love having that, and they really get into each other and support each other in embracing freedom.